Welcome back to the December edition of Conversations, and I'm so glad to be able to welcome the Archdiocesan Vicar for Priests, Father Jeff Shooner. Father Jeff, thank you for being here on the program.
It is my pleasure, Archbishop. Always a joy to join you.
Now, we're going to have a lot to talk about, but before we do, let me give some little introduction because I did some research on your life. First of all, I mentioned that you are the Vicar for Priests, but you're also, as part of that, the Director for the Office of Vocations, and we'll be talking a little bit about that. For our viewing audience, Father Jeff was ordained to the priesthood in 2004, so is now 8 years a priest. After ordination, he served in a number of parishes within the Archdiocese, Immaculate Conception Parish in LaGrange, and then St. James in Elizabethtown and St. Ignatius in White Mills. Then as pastor of St. Lawrence, and then as sacramental moderator of St. Boniface Parish, both in Louisville. So, Father Jeff, thank you again for being here. Now, why would I not ask you to begin by giving your vocation story? Because we're talking about you as the Director of Vocations. Tell us a little bit about the way in which Christ called you to be a priest.
Well, thank you, Archbishop, for the opportunity to share some of my vocation story. It is a story that has stops and starts, that is imperfect, that has fear and also some courage, but ultimately it ends up being a story about faith and about following.
Hey, we may make a movie. That sounds good. That sounds good. Right. Well, I'm all ears.
Sure. We begin with my story a little bit in high school, and it really follows my relationship with God and my story of faith. And in high school, I didn't have a deep connection to God. I thought of God and religion as being sort of part of a well-balanced meal. Like God was the side salad, you know, important but not essential to the meal. And when I went to college, then I really encountered some challenges that I couldn't overcome by myself, and was open to relationship with others in a new way, and then ultimately open to my relationship with God. And that relationship then became one where I thought of God as being the number one priority in my life.
This was after or during college?
During college.
Where did you go to college?
I went to the United States Air Force Academy.
Oh, sure, in Colorado.
There are a couple of challenges there.
I bet, I'll bet, yeah.
And when I was there and I started to put God first, I started to realize, well, God didn't just want to be first on a laundry list of priorities. That God, in fact, wanted to be part of every area of my life. And that relationship, as it grew and developed, started to be something that called me to more integrity and actually made me interested in what God had to say about my life, about His call in my life. So when I was in high school, again, I was there and we had a priest chaplain. I went to Holy Cross High School here in town. Yeah,
great.
And
I know you're still a cougar.
I am.
Exactly.
That's great. And I love going back there. Yeah. But when I was there, I was invited to consider priesthood a number of times. I like the biblical number 7, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. But a number of times by the chaplain, have you ever thought about being a priest? And I was a fairly driven young man. I had a lot of goals in life, and I thought, no, I'm not really interested.
But someone did ask you. Was it a priest?
It was a priest.
You? How about that?
Yep. And so I had established some goals for my life, and I wanted 1 to get married, 2 to have children, 3 I was influenced by the TV show at the time, Family Ties. Okay. And I wanted to earn $1 million by the time I was 30.
Oh, wow.
And then I wanted to become President of the United States.
Wow.
So lofty goals in some sense. And I tried to follow those, and that's part of the reason why I went to the Air Force Academy, and I was seeking that. And it was really initially the question, what do I want to be when I grow up? And then in high school, the desire to have my life make a difference. So what difference is my life going to make? And really once I got to college, the question became both of those, what I want to be and what difference is my life going to make, but also where is God calling me to be?
Yeah, so it kept moving you, in a sense, it was God's grace moving you out of yourself a little bit.
That's right.
Very good.
That's right. And so I got to that point where I started to ask that question, and then I was terrified of the possibility of priesthood.
That's right.
What's the answer going to be?
Yeah.
And so I didn't tell anybody for a while that I thought God was calling me to priesthood. And that was okay. That was a time for me to, in some ways, get used to the idea, to be able to recognize and become more confident in God's voice and His call for me. But it was really a time of fear too, and I was afraid of what that might mean, and that I'd have to let go of the other things that I had planned for my life.
Sure.
And
yeah, part of the decision is kind of letting go of good things.
That's right.
In order to, in a sense, do better things.
That's right. In some ways, we call that a holy detachment. That it gives us the freedom to really follow and be open to God's will.
Who did you tell first? Who did you?
Well,
do you recall that?
I do think that it was my mom.
Oh, good.
And my mom worked with a member of the Sarah Club at the time.
Oh, very good.
And
you have a great mom.
Well, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I love her greatly and deeply, and anything that I always say, anything that's good in me comes from her.
Yeah, it's great.
And from God, but through her.
Right.
And so I told her, and she mentioned it to the member of the Sarah Club, and then he mentioned it to Father Steve Pohl at the time, who was the Vocation Director, and Father Steve called me. And they were having a vocation retreat, and I decided to go on the vocation retreat. And really, that was a couple years after I had left college, and went on the retreat. And Father Steve had a session where he asked 7 questions, that number again, of you might be called to the priesthood if.
Okay.
And so I dutifully wrote down the questions and wrote down my answers, and I answered yes to all 7. And Father Steve said, you know, if you answered yes to 3 or 4 of these questions, you might be called to the priesthood. And so I thought,
so you're off the charts.
That's right.
As they say. Well, that's right. Well, that's great. God spoke loudly to you in that retreat.
And I got to that point of having the confidence, and it was really a mistake on my part, but almost the certainty that God was calling me to the priesthood. I thought that I had to know for sure before I went to seminary that this is where God was calling me. And I recognize that now as a mistake because
seminary is a formation time.
It is a formation and discernment time. Right. So it is a time to ask that question and discern more fully. Right. And that's what happened for me. So I was there for 3 semesters in seminary. My discernment didn't end when I had the courage to say yes to go to seminary. It continued there.
Right.
And I was there for 3 semesters, and then took 3 years off, and then returned to seminary for the final 3.5 years at the time. Wow. And really grew in that. And I know we have remembered Archbishop Kelly here, and I am so grateful for him during that time and his generosity in welcoming me back into the program. And I remember in that discernment in seminary where I came to a point of saying, I'm not sure if I kind of fit the mold. Yeah. And stereotypes are always wrong, but I was thinking, I'm not sure if I fit a stereotype of what priesthood should be. And had a conversation with Archbishop Kelly and said, you know, Archbishop Kelly, I'm not sure if I fit this mold. And Archbishop, in his typical wisdom and wit, responded, well, I don't ordain robots.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Listen, you've beautifully laid out, I think, the hills and valleys of vocation. Tell us a little bit. We don't have that much time, unfortunately, but tell us a little bit about the qualities of those young men who are studying for the priesthood now. We have 17.
Yes.
What a great blessing it's been. But what would be some of the trends, if you would, that you could tell us about?
I think there's 2 real quickly trends that I've noticed in my time in the vocation office. One is that 15 years ago, we were looking at a trend of older vocations. And those are a blessing, and they're wonderful for older men who come forward to serve in the church. But we've been seeing a trend over the last 6 years of a greater openness on the part of younger generations.
It's true. I've seen that certainly with our seminarians.
That's right.
And what's the other trend?
And the other trend would be that we are also seeing that our priests are growing in their confidence of inviting people. And it's such important for them, and I'm grateful to all of them. You know, it's a humbling thing, but a very honest thing to say. I don't know of a seminarian that's been ordained that cited me as their inspiration for priesthood.
Yeah.
It's always been their parish priest, their pastor, or their associate pastor.
That's great. Now, Father Jeff, I know that when we look at the culture of vocations, every baptized Catholic has a vocation.
Amen.
And that's part of what you nurture. And you mentioned, I'm so glad you mentioned Sarah Club, because Sarah has been so good with that. And I'm also so pleased that you mentioned the important influence that a priest has in identifying, calling forth, and then sustaining those who are called to the priesthood.
Yes.
We're very blessed. We could also have you back again to talk a little bit about the other important aspect of your work, and that is supporting our priests once ordained, which itself is its own story. But I want to thank you today. I think we spent most of our time appropriately talking about the way God specifically called you. But I hear from what you're saying that really every one of our seminarians has a similar story, and in fact, every follower of Christ has that story. Thanks so much for being with us for Conversations. I appreciate it very much.
Hey, it's my pleasure, and I always love to talk about God's work in our lives as Christians and as Catholics following His call.
Well, hey, you're doing a great job. And thank you, the viewing audience, for taking part in this segment of the December edition of Conversations. Please stay tuned, and we'll be right back with the final segment.